Hi guys, Aceface back with another video for you, and I've got a painting tutorial for you today. One of the biggest questions that I get from subscribers is how do you paint your Hive fleet, what colours do you use, how do you apply the techniques. So rather than me tell everybody in every message, I thought it would be really good to put together a painting tutorial so you can see how I paint them. It's a very simple scheme, it's very easy. I alter it slightly for different size miniatures. So for my small gaunts, it's a very simple scheme. It's predominantly dry brushing and it uses less colours. As you start to get to the sort of mid-sized creatures like this lictor you see here, it's a midway point. It uses a bit more colours, there's a little bit more blend, and it still uses predominantly a dry brush effect. When you go on to monstrous creatures and gargantuan monstrous creatures, I use a lot more airbrush, I use a lot more blends of different colours, I use a lot more washes and spend a lot more time on the bases and the extra effects. But predominantly I use more or less the same colours and I use more or less the same technique. So hopefully in this video I will show you how it's done relatively quickly. Okay, and what I'm going to be painting is one of these guys. So I'm going to be painting a lictor for you, and hopefully you can follow it and see how it's done. My little disclaimer before I start is I am not an award-winning painter. My painting skills at best are a good tabletop, I would say. When I really put my heart and soul into it for the bigger models, I can get a finish that I'm relatively proud of and I think stands up nicely. But generally my painting is to get the models looking nice and effective and fit the theme well on the table, but allow me to paint large quantities of miniatures in a relatively short time, because I need to do that being a Tyranid player and having the immense volume of Tyranids that I've got. Okay, anyway, I'm wittering and this video is going to be long as it is, so let's go on to the painting tutorial. So, this is the paints that we will be using today. And there seems like quite a lot of paints there. Not all of these are essential, but I'm going to run through anyway. So, what I'll do is I will put in the description below the paints that I used so you can follow it as a shopping list. So for the blue at the moment I'm using this paint. This paint is Tulsa Blue. This is Scale Colour from, I'm trying to remember what the paint range is. I'll put it in the description below. I think it's called Scale 70 or something like that. But it's a paint that I've only really relatively used for a short period of time, but it gives me quite a nice texture. It dries quite kind of almost like gritty, but it's hard to explain, but it gives me a really effective deep petrol-y blue as a base. It's a very nice paint, so I'm enjoying using this at the moment. But the old stand-in, which I'd recommend to everybody, is, if I can find it here, it is the Cantor Blue. So the Cantor Blue is the base that I tend to stick to as my base colour for the blue carapace. After that, the colour that you'll need is Lothram Blue, and that gives you a lovely highlight. Then again, this is one of the steps that you can choose to use or choose to throw out if you don't want, but the Gilliman Blue glaze from Games Workshop. Onto the greens, we start off with Caliban Green, which is a nice covering base. Then Warpstone Glow for your mid, and then Moot Green highlight, and then for extreme highlights you have the Flesh Gits Yellow. So that gives us our green colour. The base colour, the skin colour if you like, we simply use, particularly for this size miniature, we just use the Castoray Grey, and that over a black base is what we use. Now, particularly for the smaller models, I will go straight on to my primer. I make sure that there's no grey areas on the primed miniature. If I need to top it up with a little bit of Abaddon Black, I will use that, but generally if I prime them properly, I can use just this as my skin colour. Now on for the base. The base, I swear by this stuff, the Astro Granites, and I use cork tiling as the sort of the scenic part of it. And then on top of that, I use a wash of null oil, and I use weathering powders. I use the Forge World weathering powders. Lots of other ones are available which would be just as good, if not better, but I use the Forge World ones. I use dry mud and faded green for this particular base. For the eyes, I use 4 colours. With this miniature I probably would just use 3, but for a lot of them we start with the red, the Evil Sun Scarlet, and then we go up to the Troll Slayer Orange, and then we use again the Flash Gits Yellow, and for the larger models I will use a Ceramite White. You can use the yellow or just the white, it depends on what you like to go for. And then the couple of extra little bits is I use my hard coat for the sort of the finish for all the green parts, and a really key part of the process is your thinner. I swear by Vallejo thinner medium. I think it is the best. I've tried quite a few, and this is really effective at getting a really simple thin down paint, so I would go with this one. So that's what I use. As far as paintbrushes, for this we'll be using 3 paintbrushes. We'll be using my very knackered dry brush. Need a new one of them, and that's a kind of a medium dry brush size wise. I'm going to use just a standard brush, standard size, sort of all round good brush. And then I have a very fine detail. This I use very little, it's more for just eyes. We have my mixing palette and my rag to dry brush things off, and we'll go into the painting. Okay, so this is the lictor that we're going to be painting today, and we're going to start off with the grey. So we take our grey, only need a tiny little bit really, and then we're just wiping off all the excess. So we've got a nice sort of dry brush, and then very quickly we're just going over everything. Really simple, easy technique. You just need to make sure there's not enough paint on there. Don't be scared when you initially put this paint on, because what you'll find with it is it looks brighter on first inspection, so it looks very white, and it looks quite an exaggerated grey. As it dries even more, even though it's already quite dry, it actually tones down quite a lot, so it will be a lot more subtle when we kind of finish, but you get an idea. So literally just going a bit more, and I'm just literally covering, and it doesn't matter if you cover other parts of the model because you'll be going over them in other colours. Try and stick away from them, but actually in some ways sometimes it can help, because generally the natural areas that you're hitting are going to be the parts that you're highlighting, and this slight raise in colour will almost optimise your later highlighting and your later other colours, so it's not a bad thing. So just trying not to miss anything. See there, and that pretty much the skin almost done, really, to be fair. You know, just try and make sure get everything in his hands. Try and make sure that you catch all the bits higher up where the light's definitely going to hit. You don't want to miss those bits because that will ruin the natural look of it. But there we go. Okay, so that, as you can see quite easily, is the skin done. Okay, so wash that brush off. Now what I would say is, if you were doing a bigger model, is potentially I would start with a coating of a darker grey to start off with, and then do this over the top, and then I would wash it down with some null oil into the recesses, and that works to give you an extra effect for the larger models. But on a model this size, that is quite effective, and that's all you really need. Okay, so let's go on to the next effect, or the next stage. We'll use this, and as I said, please do just use your Cantop blue. If you can't get hold of this or don't want to use it, it's absolutely fine. We're going to put it on there. It's really interesting because when you use this, you'll find that you can see it down at the bottom there. It looks quite bright, but as it dries a lot darker. We're going to use some of our medium. Don't need much of it. And let's get our standard brush. Make sure you've got a nice point, and then water that down a little bit, and then start doing all the carapace. So again, relatively easy. Keep the paint sort of nice and thin. If you get areas that don't cover perfectly, you don't need to worry about it too much, because what you're going to find is that once we start highlighting it with the additional brighter blues, it almost gives us extra layers to the model, because what it will show is you'll get a little bit of the black showing through, and that doesn't look too bad at all. It just adds to the effect of the model. Just try to make sure as much as possible the areas that are going to be exposed more, that are likely to catch the sun in reality, they're the areas that you've got more of a stronger blue on, and that will kind of put you in good stead. But this paint's quite nice, you know, as I said, it goes on pretty well. It gives me quite a smooth colour. It dries particularly well. I'm just going to go onto his head. Sure that we don't go onto the skin, because obviously that part is now more or less done. We don't want to be putting any paint on there. And as you can see, it's quite quick, you know, it doesn't take that long to do. On a model this size, you know, we're already sort of flying through this model. It's not taking too long, so you can see how you can rock through quite a lot of miniatures in a relatively short period of time using this technique and this painting scheme. Obviously, if you want to adapt it and use a different colour, you could do it in green, so you could do your carapaces all in green, and sort of, and then use, I don't know, a bone colour, maybe more for the pointy bits, whatever you like to do. There's plenty of other sort of very effective schemes that work. Now moving on to his legs. I use quite a lot of paint on my paintbrush, but it's because it's nice and thin down. I then spread it around once I've got it on the model. It saves me having to continuously go back and forward to the palette. I can use it all because it's watered down, because I'm moving it quickly. I'm not worried about it gathering. I'm just making sure that we get nice coverage, but I'm keeping it thin at the same time. If I need to go back over it afterwards, I can do. It's absolutely fine, because again it's thin. I'm using nice thin paint, but the paint itself covers nicely, so which is helping me make sure that this only really needs to be one coat, two at most. So we've done now, as you can see on there, we've done his legs, done his carapace, now just onto his claw bits. So just with there's little grills that you'll find with all Tyranids. For this size model, quite often I will ignore them. I'll always fill them in on a monstrous creature, but on a mid-size model I tend to leave them out. Again, it's just for me. I'm getting through a lot of models in a short period of time. I don't want to be spending loads of time picking out loads and loads of detail, but you know, you can do if you want to take it to the next level. It will add an extra pop to your miniature. It will be worthwhile. But for me, I'm painting a lot, and I just want to get it done to a nice simple standard that looks effective. So I'm going to go through this. Do this. Again, it's coming down nicely. Hopefully it's bringing out. I can't really see exactly, guys, how it's coming out on the camera. I'm looking at the screen, it looks okay, but hopefully you guys are being able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going on to the last arm, and then we're almost done the base colour for the blue. It's coming quite nicely. I do love these Lictor models, such a cool model. Really good fig. Lots of opportunity to position them in quite dynamic ways, which is good. Right, we're getting there, guys. We're getting there. Again, just making sure I stay clear of the grey. Getting good cover on all of the carapace, and that's done. So we have one more small part, which will be blue on mine, which is, it just has like a little tail piece on the back with a little bit of carapace, which we're just going to paint in blue as well. Simple. Okay, now by now the blue is starting to dry. I can see it as it starts to sort of really tone down, which I don't know whether you can see there. It starts to tone over, start to see a little bit of the black creeping through, but it's giving me a nice petrol colour. I can then sort of scan over it and check to see if there's anything else I want to highlight and bring up a little bit more. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an extra coat just on this top part. Again, not really very thick, because I don't want to completely hide that gradient. I just want to just make it pop a little bit more. So I'm just going to do that. Again, I'm just looking for areas that I think could do with a little bit extra. Pretty happy with that. Okay, so that is my blue base coat done. Okay, so I'm going to wash that brush off. I'm going to put him down. And we'll go on to our green. So for the green, I'm going to use a Caliban green, which is like your old Dark Angel green. It's a lovely colour, it covers really well, it's very thick in pigment, you need to water it down, even when you're using it for this basic base part. So I'm going to use almost a 1-to-1, not quite, and then I'm just going to mix it up so I get the nice consistency I want. And now I'm going to do the green. So for the green, what I'm going to cover, I've just realised I missed a bit of blue, so I'll go back and do his chest piece later. So what I'm going to do with green is I'm going to go down all the areas just below the carapace on the big talons, scything talons, the sort of modified scything talons that the lictors have. Probably one of the fiddliest bit because it's actually relatively small. I've got a little bit of shaky hand because I'm doing this live for you guys, but yeah, it's coming on okay. So we're going to do that. It's got some little spikes I'm just going to get as well. I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to do the same on the other side. So once you've done all the talons and you've done all the spikes, you can do the same with the head, and with these they've got like little tentacle bits. So I mean, normally you wouldn't have very much of the green around the face, but because lictors have got this kind of greeny, they've got this kind of mandible-y kind of face, then I like to do them in green as well. We don't go up as far any further than that though, just keep it to that. I've already done the tail piece, so there's a little part on the tail, and then the last things that I need to do is just we do the hoof. Sometimes I do the hooves, sometimes I don't. Just depends on what I feel like. On these guys I'm going to do them, and then they've got like a secondary little claw as well, so I'm just going to paint that green. And then for the last bit is I'm just going to pick out just the front of their claws. And that gives me, so that's all the green done. Okay, so it's at this stage now the green's kind of drying, so I will go back to blues, and we're going to go back to our dry brush, and this is where we're going to do the highlights. Now on a larger monstrous creature, what I would do now to do the blue is I would start to mix it. So I would mix it into like a crag blue with a bit of this, and then I would slowly bring it up through layers, and that's how I do my monstrous creatures as far as their carapaces. And I will almost do like a very subtle Chichin style, so little tiny lines, but on the smaller creatures I don't like to do it. It's too time consuming, it's very fiddly. If you don't do it well, it will ruin the look of the model, whereas this is very easy and straightforward. So I've got a nice dry brush here, and then all I'm going to do is just literally run down. And the important thing with this is, more than anything else, is on the whole you want to stick to just going one direction. You don't want to be, and ideally you want to be going against the ridges. And what that does is naturally it gives you like a streak. It'll hit it'll almost give you like a chitchin line. It's not quite, doesn't work quite the same, but it gives you like almost that effect. So if you can see there, hopefully you can. It's really nice. It kind of works really effectively without it being too difficult. Again, you want to really go minimum on this, because you can always put more in afterwards, so you can go up. If you want to make it lighter, you can pop white into it as well. That works okay, but you'll find that that will give you a really nice effect, as you can hopefully see there. Okay, so very quickly that's all done. So you can see it on the back there, you've got a nice little highlight. You can see where it's kind of all along the ridges, works really nicely. So that, you can, at that stage, you can leave the carapace as that, and it looks quite effective, and that's what I will do for me gaunts. What I like to do for anything from this size and up is my final stage with it will be to go over it in a Gilliman blue. So we shall do that now. So you got your Gilliman blue. With this, we're just taking a little bit of it. A little bit goes a long way. You've got to be careful with this stuff. You can obviously go straight from the bottle. You don't need to water this down. And then literally you want to spread this. You need to, you have one application, so one load on your paintbrush will more or less do most of this model. It doesn't take a lot at all. It does really go a long way, but all you want to do is you're using it, but you keep taking it off as well. So you're getting it on, and you want to concentrate on going into all of the crevices, because you are using this as a little bit of a shading wash at the same time. This performs quite a lot of different jobs on this miniature. One thing it does is it'll give you a nice finish, so it takes away a little bit of the grit from your initial two coats and makes it smoother. It smooths out the transition, and it also on top of that, it gives you some very subtle shading. So it really does provide a good technique. But as I said, it's one of the steps that if you're really trying to drive on and want to try and reduce what you're painting, it's one of the stages that I would suggest that you take out. But as you can see, it's not taking me long at all, and then we're done on that. And that is the carapace done. Okay, so the next stage is we're going to go on to highlighting the green. We're going to use Warpstone green, Warpstone glow should I say. This you can do in a few different ways. You can water it down and do almost like a dry dry wash, a dry sort of mix, you know, a dry blend, or you can actually do a dry brush. I like to do kind of, it's almost like a heavy dry brush, and all I'm doing with it is I'm just kind of like picking out the ends, just sort of emphasising it. I'm not going right the way down to into the creases. I'm just sort of doing probably about 3/4 of each green part. It doesn't take very long. We're just kind of going over it, and that's more or less it. Right. Let's just get a bit more. Doing on the tips of the hooves. the tips of the other talon. What it gives us, it gives us quite a nice highlight, and it works nicely over the top of that Caliban green. Just gonna tip all the little tiny little spines, so that works nicely, and then we're just going to finish by just doing the claws, and then lastly we just do the mouth. And with this you're kind of almost doing a dry brush really, because you don't want to be going into the actual crevices and creases. You want them almost to stay kind of black. So we're a little bit too much into there, so I'm just going to grab that out there, and that's that. And that's now looking nice, and you can see already he's just starting to come together now. Okay. Now, just while we're waiting for that green to dry, I'm just going to quickly go back and pick out this blue centerpiece, which is there, and I'll come back and I'll dry brush that up later. Okay, let's go on to our final green stage. So, green stage, second to last. So we're going to use the moot green, and this is probably my favourite colour in the Citadel range. I love this colour. It covers awesome, so you have to kind of be a little bit careful with it. I'm going to use my standard brush, but I'm almost going to use like a dry brush effect. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to just pick the ends, but I'm going heavier to the right to the point. Make sure I've got almost full cover on there, and the same on all the other points. But as I get closer in, it's more of a dry brush. So it's you're kind of almost dry blending on it, but it's like a heavy dry brush kind of technique. So yeah, you're concentrating on that point, making sure that there is really good cover on there, but the rest of it is just getting almost like a dry brush. And you can just build that up. Again, less is more. Do it over a period of time, and you'll find that you get a cleaner finish. If you saw my gargoyles at all, they got quite a rough finish because I couldn't afford to be spending more time than going over them once. But normally when I'm doing a model, particularly sort of a mid-sized model, I don't mind where I'm doing a few passes on it. It makes no difference. I've got a little bit more time on my hands to concentrate on it. Again, you can see on there, I'm just going right to the tip, making sure that tip's really clean with the moot, but the rest of it's quite choppy because it naturally lends itself. I'm just going to go over that because I'm not quite happy with it's not bright enough yet, so I'm going to keep going with that. This stage my palette's dried up quite nicely for this moot green, so it's working really well. I don't even need to really brush it off too much. It's just going on nice. So we're starting to get the highlight that we want. I'm going on to the mouth, and again I'm just concentrating on that lower half. I'm leaving the top half completely as it was before, just concentrating on a real nice highlight on the front. Do the same with the feet, and just catching the end of the claws. Quite happy with that. It's come on really nice. So you can kind of see there you've got the quite bright green showing through. It looks really good, and And again, at this stage you can leave it like that if you like that. I like a little bit more of a pop, so we'll go up an extra stage. And what we'll do to go up that extra stage is we'll go on to a little bit of Flesh Gits Yellow. Now the Flesh Gits Yellow is an awesome colour. It's extremely bright. As you can see it on the end of the brush there, it's really, really bright. Now you can, if you want, mix it in almost to the moot green for a bit more of a subtle transition, but if you blend this correctly, then you'll find that you can just go neat on the yellow. And all I'm going to do, so like on this face here, you can hopefully see, I'm just literally picking out the ends. Just drying that off, and I'm just picking out right the ends. You can see hopefully. Hoping. Let's go on the talon, on the hooves. Again, we're just picking out right at the bottom. Right at the bottom. And then let's do claws, the talons, and all at this stage we're doing is just tipping the actual the spikes. We're not doing any more than that. We're not going into it, we're just tipping the spines just to give them that crazy bright yellow colour. And when we use this little bit in the middle here, you can see this kind of little, almost like little fleshy strands. Again, we're just going through the middle of that just for that little bit of extra highlight. Go on the tail, same again, just getting that bit of pop there. Do the other side, just run out of yellow on the palette. Just onto these points, just onto those points, just down the points, and then just gonna barely touch them, just touching the end of the claws. And that does it. So that is my highlight. So you can see he's more or less there now. Then we can come back and look at the detail. Right, okay, so we're going to look at the detail now. So I've moved this forward a little bit. Because I haven't got the steadiest hand, I want to concentrate on making sure I get it right for you. So basically, I've used the Evil Sun's Scarlet to just pin the eyes, to just get the initial red in there that you can hopefully see there. Just being really, really steady to just get a nice clean circle on that to make the eye look clear. So now I'm going to go to a little bit extra detail. So I'm going to use the Troll Orange and I'm going to try and go in and do an even finer dot on it. So I'm just taking a bit of the paint off the brush and then I'm just literally going in. I don't want to cover everything that I've done previously. I just want to just hit the middle, and it's so small you can probably barely even make it out, but it just starts to make the red pop even more. And this is where I said at the beginning you have the choice. on a larger model, I would want to go up now to the yellow and then to a very small white dot to really make the eye pop. On a model this size, where the eye is relatively small, I will stop at the next level, which is going to be my flash gets yellow. And with this one, I just want to do exactly the same as I did with the orange, but I'm just going even smaller still. So I'm just making sure that I've got the absolutely tiniest point and tiniest amount of yellow on my brush, so I can keep as much control as I can. And then all I'm going to do is just literally do the smallest dot in the centre, like so. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. Sometimes it takes a couple of passes because you've got so little on the brush, but what that will now do is it will really kind of give a little highlight. It'll almost look like that white. It'll add that extra level of detail to the eye. So that is your eyes done. Now we're getting there very quickly. The areas that I'm not going to cover in too much detail, I'm not going to show you because it takes a long time for each stage to dry, and I'm going to pretty much do this all live for you. So I've kind of gone in and done it, but it is the base. So the base is the bit that I do next. And if I didn't explain fully at the beginning, I use cork tiles. You can buy them from your local DIY shop or hardware store, I think it's called in America or wherever, and so you get them, they're relatively cheap, you can get them in a big pack and they last for ages. You then snap them into as small pieces as you want. So if I get one out so you can see what it looks like, so it kind of looks a bit like that, and then it's really easy to break up. You just break it into the bits that you want to make the shapes, and that gives you a nice texture. And what I do, depending on the type of model, these I want to add a bit of extra character to, so I stack them up to give that kind of rocky looking face. It gives a real effective sort of unique style to it. So they go on the early stages, and then I prime with the rest of the model. That's how I do it. So once I've got to that stage and I've painted the model up to this level, I then use this, which is a texture paint from Games Workshop. It's really kind of gritty, thick paint that is very difficult to get out and apply. What you want to do is take a big chunk of it, and I'll kind of show you if I can. Let's take a brush like this. Now I wouldn't take one of your best brushes because this stuff does have a habit of pretty much wrecking your brushes. So you take it and you just try and get as much as you can on the brush, like sort of that, and then you lay it on the base. So if I get my little bit of cork again and literally lay it on the base, and then you can see from there how it's sort of, it's lumpy. Now you don't want to flatten that all down, because the whole idea of this is giving you natural texture, and it will allow this cork to look even more rocky. So all you do is you spread it out over as much as you want. You want it still to cover, but you want enough excess to show the lumpy grit, because when that dries it will go solid and it'll give you that extra texture. So what I do then is I layer that all over the base that you'll see on here, so that goes all the way over. It doesn't matter if I leave a little bit of black here and there, it won't matter. After that's all dried, and it does take a long time to dry, you then use a null oil wash. That then brings that colour right down from that quite bright concretey grey to more of a gritty, dirty grey, which is what you want. After that stage, you then want to start to highlight it up. Now I'm going to do it this side of the process. I would recommend that you do it earlier, so I would do it as I explained, so I would do it after your null oil wash has dried, but I'm going to do it now just so you can see how you do it. Now I'm going back into using the grey that we used to highlight the skin, and I'm going to give this a good shake because it's settled a bit. Okay. And we don't need a lot of this, we need very little, particularly at this stage for me. You can go a bit heavier because you'll see afterwards we're going to do a final stage. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and just lift the edges of this. So all I'm doing is I'm just going over right on the edges, and I'm just going to try and just lift and give it a little bit of a highlight. It's only really subtle at this stage. I don't want to be going too carried away, but what it's just going to give me is it's going to give me just a little bit more of a 3D effect. It's going to give a little bit more of a realistic style to it that you'll probably be able to make out. It's just lifting that rock, and I'm not going right in deep, I'm just literally going on the edges and just onto it. And what that's meaning is that it's just highlighting a little bits and pieces of the grit, but not too much of it. And you can be a little bit heavier when you do it, because as you'll see next, we have another process that you'll be able to see on this. Right, so I'm happy with that. So you can see on there where the highlight I've just laid on there is just picking out my grey. So after that, you can leave it at that point, and that will give you a really nice finish. You don't need to go any further. That's absolutely fine, and that's what I would do for my very small gaunts. So when you see my termagants, they'll all be done just like that. But what you'll be able to see on this model, and what I'll show you how to do next, is the final stage of the basing. Well, not quite, almost the final stage of basing, which is using my pigment washes to give me that extra colour dimension. So as I said at the beginning, the ones I use for this is I use Forge World ones, and I use Dry Mud, and I use Faded Green. Dry Mud is the key one, and you can get away with, if you haven't got that and you haven't got any pigment washes, you can use a bit of Avrax Earthshade is pretty good. It doesn't give you quite as dry, gritty effect as a pigment will, but it does work pretty well, so I would definitely recommend using that if you haven't got hold of a pigment. So what you do then, and again I've already done this on here, but I will show you how you do it. Take another palette, don't use the same one that you've used for your painting, and then grab your pigment, and all you want to do is just sprinkle just a little bit on there, just like that, so you can see there's not much on there. And then what you want to do now is you want to add water to that. Now you can add as much or as little as you want. If you add a lot of water to this stage, you'll get a really nice wash. If you add very little water and it's more pigment, you'll get almost a paint, a brown paint. You don't want to go to that stage, you want it to be a real wash. So I've got one of these, which is can't really see it, but it's like a tattoo bottle, and they use it to sort of to wet the tattoos as they go along. I'm not explaining it very well, but you can get this if you kind of put in like tattoo bottle on eBay. You can get them, pick them up really cheap. I use them for my airbrush and all sorts. But it's just, you need water, some way of applying water to the palette. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck loads and loads of water on here. I'm going to really put tons on. Now as you can see on this palette, there's already loads of old pigment from where I've applied it before. The good thing with pigment is you can reuse it. So whatever's on the palette that dries up, you can then just by applying water use it again. So there's already quite a lot of pigment on there. So you can see I've absolutely added tons and tons of water, but that's what I want. And then I'm going to use a big brush and I'm just going to mix it in, and you can see there I'm just turning the water to a real brown. As I said, I've got lots more in here, and you can see the older stuff that I've got there. I can just mop that into it, and already you can see it's coming away from there, and I've got more pigment on there. Once you've got it on there, you're almost using it like a wash, so you can use it quite liberally, and then you literally you don't need to cover the base, you just dab it on the areas where you want them to look a little bit more brown and rustic and muddy. You don't want it to cover the whole base, you just want it on bits and pieces of the base, as you'll see on here. It doesn't cover everything, I've just added little bits and pieces to it. Once you've done that, and you've used that on your dry mud, then I use this one, which is the faded green, and I do exactly the same again, but this time I use a little bit less. I only produce a tiny little bit, and then I just dab it on the edges of the model, and then what that does is that gives you almost a subtle moss effect, which works really nicely. So I'm going to carefully just lay this down because we don't need this anymore. And it will give you, and again it's really subtle, but you can kind of make it out around the edges, that kind of real subtle greeny tone to it. Okay, so we're really getting there now, we're almost there. There is just literally some little extra bits. Now at this point we're going to go to using our hard coat. Now this stuff I absolutely love, some people don't. I can't get enough of it, it really does what I want it to do. So what we're going to try and do now is give a different effect, a different finish to parts of the model, because what we've already done now is we've got a really rusticy looking base, we've got a rusticy looking shell, even though it's glossed slightly because of our varnishy, what's the word? I've lost the word. Yeah, our glaze, that's it. So we've already used it, and then the skin's again very rustic. So what we want is the green bits on this model to pop a little bit more and to look almost slimy. So we're going to use, again, not the greatest brush, we're going to put quite a lot, we're going to really heavily load the brush up with this stuff. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over all the green. Now the big key here is what I'm trying to look for, and I'm trying to look for like bubbles. So in the lictor's like armpits, if you like, he's got these almost strands, which you can probably see there, and you can see where it's just gripping to those areas. And it's almost giving me like a bubble between it, and that's the effect that I really want. It's going to mean that it's going to look like almost slime, which is what I'm after. And I'm going to do the same over here. I'm just going to cover things. I'm going to cover the ends of his claws. I'm going to get some more, and I'm going to apply it to his mouth. And again, his mouth, I want it to be really shiny and slimy. It looks a little bit white when it goes on. When it dries, it goes clear. So that's what I want. I'm not going to go as heavy on this one. I'm not going to have the slime going through on both of them. I'm just going to make sure this is nicely applied over. You don't want things to look too symmetrical on anything like this. You want it to look a little bit rough and rustic, because it's organic. And that's it, really quickly. I've just covered this model. It will take longer on larger models. Once you've got to this stage, you now need to let that dry. If you've missed a bit, you can go back in afterwards and relay it down. Don't start adding extras to it now, because this is already now starting to dry. If you start to tamper with it before it goes solid, it will actually start to move the paint off that's underneath it as it grips hold of it, because it's like a varnish. So you have to let it dry at this point and come back afterwards. So we're more or less there. That is pretty much our finished guy. All I'm going to add to it now is I'm going to add some tufts. So you can get these from eBay or whatever. I've just got some little brown dead tufts, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my glue. I only want one on this, I just want a little bit of extra detail, and I'm going to be very careful, because obviously we've got the setting of the off the hard coat. I'm just going to pop a little bit on the base there, just a tiny little dab. You can use PVA, you don't need to use super glue. And I'm just going to then just tuck that right in there. Use a paintbrush bit just to tidy it up, make sure it's right in there. Just what I want. Spread that out a little bit, and there you go. There is your finished lictor, all done. And you can see I've done more or less most of this live for you straight on camera. This isn't sped up, so you can see how quickly we can get that very nice tabletop finish, and how we can quite easily then put together an effective unit. So these guys aren't completely finished, well not all of them are, but we'll just show you, you know, let's get some more in there, chuck some more lictors in there, and these I finished relatively quickly. So just some eye detail and a bit of extras to go on these, but they are more or less done. And you can see, particularly when you've got a nice unit, hang on, we've got another one in there, let's chuck another one in there as well. And when you've got a nice big brood like that, it looks really effective. The colour scheme works, the bases work, it just all pops. You can see all the detail and the rustic effect of it. So I'll be really interested to see if anybody tries this out. Let me know how you get on. Let me know whether you think this video has been useful. As I said, it's the first video like this I've done, so I hope it's useful to you. If there are anybody out there that are using the Hive Fleet Voro colours, I'd love to see some of your models. It'd be great to see either in a video response or send me some pictures, because I'd love to see them. But thank you very much for watching, guys. Please do like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.